Hi, everyone. My name is Tory Parrish. I'm the Region 1 Director for NABJ. Thank you for joining us for our panel tonight, Pay and Perks, How to Negotiate Salary and Beyond. We only have an hour, so I'm just going to get right into it, introducing our panelists. First, we have Leroy Chapman Jr. Leroy is a Deputy Managing Editor at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He oversees a large portion of the newspaper's print and digital news content, which includes government, education, crime, and courts. And he was previously the governance editor at the state in Columbia, South Carolina. We also have Elisa Jackson, and she's Glassdoor's Director of Content Marketing. She's also a host and executive producer of In Pursuit, the #1 careers podcast on Apple in the US. She has 15 years of content and journalism experience, during which she has interviewed celebrities, policymakers, and top executives. And then we also have Jacquette Timmons, President and CEO of Sterling Investment Management. She's also a financial behaviorist and the author of Financial Intimacy, How to Create a Healthy Relationship with Your Money and Your Mate. Her work has been featured on ABC's Good Morning America, CNN, NPR, Reuters, etc. Running our technology tonight, we have Angela Holcomb, who's Executive Assistant for NABJ, and Kanya Stewart as Support, who's Director of Communications. So thank you all for joining us. For those who are listening to the webinar, or audience members, you can ask questions in 2 ways. If you hover at the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. That means you can ask an anonymous question. Just type your question in there anonymously if you don't want your boss to know you're on this webinar, and I'll read the question to the panelist. You can also type it in at the bottom, you'll see chat. If you type it in there, everyone can see the question, the panelists, the audience members. I'll still read the question to the panelist. So we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, the major question is going to be, how do you ask for what you want? What's the best way to go about asking for what you want? Let's start with Elisa.
So, hi everyone, really excited to join you this evening. Asking for what you want is a delicate dance, right? You don't want to come off greedy, you don't want to come off thirsty. You want to come from a place of strength, and you want to come from a place of confidence. And so these discussions around salary negotiations are really sort of about preparation. You really want to sort of build a case and prove that you are worth investing in with specific examples of value that you've given to the employers in your career or that you give to your current newsroom. You should really be prepared to sort of face some resistance and really build that airtight case on why you deserve to earn what you're asking for. And then you always want to sort of strike this balance, right, between being firm and then being flexible. So it's not just enough to like stand your ground and not concede, but it's really sort of a dance, if you will, between yourself and your employer.
Okay. So Jacquette, thank you, Elisa. Jacquette, you want to elaborate on this, on how do you decide what to ask for? And what factors do you consider when you decide what to ask for when you're negotiating salary and beyond?
I think one of the things to always keep in mind is that negotiation is always in service to something. And so get really clear about what it is that you want from the negotiation. Is it experience? Is it money? Is it both? Because that will influence how you actually navigate that negotiation experience. But also spend some time thinking about what's the goal of the other party that you're negotiating with? Like, what do they need? What do they need as an individual? What do they need as the lead of a department or a newsroom? What do they need as an organization? And the more, going back to what Elisa said, the more you are prepared in terms of the research, the better able you are to then package your value and what you're bringing to the table to be in alignment with what it is that you are negotiating for, like what that is in service to. Again, experience, money, or a combination of both.
Okay, thank you. Leroy, we talked about this before. Can we talk about being realistic? What is realistic, and what should you consider when you go to the table to ask a new boss or a current boss for a raise or a promotion or whatever it may be?
I think it's important to understand, number one, the difference between being realistic about what it might cost for you to live and what the marketplace might pay for what you do. So an example of that is this. I mean, if you think that in your organization that you understand that your worth, your importance, that you fulfill a certain role in your organization and that there's a tiny pool of people that can do what you do, of course, there's leverage. But I think there's sometimes at the beginning of a career, we may not understand that there is a deep and wide pool. So I think we touched on the difference between money and also I think other perks that you can ask for. And I think at the beginning of a career, some of the perks might be just as important. And that's thinking about asking about training and other things that can certainly help you advance in your career. And maybe even asking on the front end about being evaluated. And once you've proven yourself, I'd like an evaluation that's off cycle, for example. You know, and 6 months in, I'd like for you to evaluate me. And if I'm doing the job, then maybe we should talk about some higher compensation. So it's negotiating in a way, I think, at the front end that's pretty realistic about that. And also with the boss, you know, being able to walk in, understanding your worth, and also being flexible and even creative and saying, maybe you can't come up with a big check for me, but maybe we can have some checkpoints where you can evaluate me and compensate me if I'm proving my value.
Great, thank you. I'll come back to that point. Someone asked a question in the Q&A. It says, when she stated, the question is anonymous, when she stated build a case, can she please give examples?
Absolutely. So when you're thinking about building a case, it's really about, to Jaquette's point, is sort of like, how are you building sort of a compelling argument or a compelling case around what you're asking for? What is your experience? What do you do that no one else in the newsroom does? How have you gone above and beyond either accepting, stretch assignments in the past, or do you, in addition to sort of doing field reporting, do you also, cover social media, or do you do other elements that would be enticing to that employer? Another key part of building the case is really understanding what you're worth, really understanding what your role or profession pays where you are. And so Glassdoor has a tool called Know Your Worth, and it gives you a personalized salary estimate based off of your location, your education experience, what others are being paid in the space and in the state that you're in. And so you're building a case with data. You're able to go in and say, hey, a journalist in New York right now with 4 to 6 years experience is being paid $60,000. And that is either above or below where I'm at. And so it's really about doing that research and writing down those argument points, but there's nothing quite like data. I think I can probably speak for Leroy and Tory and Jaquette, everybody on the webinar who happens to be, older than 35. When we were first negotiating our salaries, you didn't know what to ask for, no. Right? I asked a woman that I worked with and was like, hey girl, what should I ask for? And she was like, $42,000. That's all you need to ask for. And I was like, say word? But I was like, okay, this is what we just gonna thug it out and go with. But now there's data. There are resources. You guys have the benefit of Google to be able to figure out what you should be paid. And so going into that conversation with your notes, your notepad, your data that backs up why you should be paid a certain amount, that builds a compelling case. And it also has, it allows for your manager or your boss to work with you on things, to understand where you're coming from and to see that you're serious about this conversation, and it kicks off that conversation.
Okay. If Know Your Worth, what's the website for that? Is there a website?
Yes, I will share it in the chat. You can Google Know Your Worth Glassdoor. It's just glassdoor.com/knowyourworth. But it's super easy because you can just plug in all your specifics and it cranks out exactly how much you should be paid and how much they're paying in various marketplaces, which is also helpful when you're looking for a job in a new location. You're trying to evaluate, okay, do I become a field producer in Saskatchewan or Atlanta? Probably Atlanta. Don't go to Saskatchewan.
Tory, before you go on, if I could just add to everything that Elisa just said, it might be helpful to actually look at the ask as you would if you were pitching a story and all of the things that go into pitching the story. And so just as you would show up for that, apply that to asking for whatever it is that you're asking for. And I think that's when it is also helpful to perhaps think of yourself as a brand. Even if you are working in-house, like how would you manage your career if you were a brand, if you were self-employed, like how would you do that? And a part of that process is pitching. So if you think of pitching for your salary as a way of pitching for a story or for a particular assignment, that might help you with that process as well.
Good. And a lot of reporters, journalists are freelancers and they are representing themselves. Good point. To the audience members, if you want to ask a question, I'll keep saying this throughout. At the bottom, you'll see Q&A. That's to ask an anonymous question. And if you hover over chat, you can ask a question that everyone in the panel, the audience will see. And I'll present it to the panelists as we go forward. We have another anonymous question. If successful in negotiating perks like vacation days, 6-month review, anything non-salary related, should you immediately ask for that to be confirmed in writing?
The answer to that is yes. So if you're thinking about, especially if you're on the front end, and I'll just go to the front end, if you're being hired, understand too, that's the most leverage you'll probably have. And the only exception to that will be if you have a firm offer on the table that someone who sits in a chair like mine will have to compete with. So those are the two moments where you've got the most leverage. But in between though, if you are asking for more money or more responsibility or a pathway, and that's the thing too that a boss is going to look for. I mean, it's one thing to say, I just need more money, but it's another thing to say, I want a pathway to be a higher earning capacity because I am, increasing either my worth or my contributions to the organization. But yes, get it all in writing. That's essential. And so there are times to do that. Of course, there are times where you're going to be evaluated to do it. But there may be times where it's just time in between evaluations too. And I'll say this too, for long-term employees, after having just even today, getting through the performance management process as we're thinking about and doling out raises, a long-term employee in a company like mine, those raises are going to be incremental and small if you're in the same position. So sometimes you have to force the issue if you are a long-term employee, and it helps to get those things in writing. And it also helps to, as has been said many times before, to make a compelling case.
So you bring up another point I wanted to ask you about, Leroy. It is, well, you're an editor, have people come to you before and they weren't ready, or you didn't think they were ready for what they're asking for or worthy of what they're asking for? How do you approach that? What's the feedback you gave?
Yes. So, obviously the one thing that probably doesn't help you is to say, I don't have the money. But sometimes the answer's been, I don't have the money. And in fact, I've had some compelling cases to say I don't have the money. But what I've always said, though, to a compelling case is we can work something out. So let me see what else we can do. Now, we've had some that have asked. In fact, I have a case just here recently where someone who felt like they needed to be paid a lot more than they were. And it sort of spurred some conversation that we had about them needing to be a little bit more self-aware about what they brought to the organization. And it was respectful, but I think it was helpful to this particular employee because I think he understood that in order for him to get to the path, we sort of talked about all the things needed to improve to get there. So we made a deal. If you do these things, then we can have that conversation about you actually getting compensated more.
Great, thank you.
Tory, can I add on to what Leroy just shared? And one of the things that I think is really helpful, especially since he just mentioned the performance process, a lot of times people wait until then to actually reflect on the year and reflect on their highlights and, the challenges that they overcame, et cetera. It might even be helpful if you get into the practice of actually perhaps doing either a weekly check-in or a monthly check-in just with yourself, just to kind of weigh, how did the week go? What did I do well? Where did I step in and pitch in where they weren't expecting me to? Where did I go above and beyond? So that when you're having those kind of performance conversations with Leroy, you're not missing something that was probably really, really critical, but you're not thinking of in the time of that conversation or in the immediate days leading up to it. If you've been tracking it throughout the year, it makes it easier to have that conversation. And then in the instance where Leroy's talking about, he didn't call it a performance improvement plan, but in essence, that's what it sounds like. When the person is in that kind of a situation, it helps them to be able to, come back and benchmark and say, here's where I was when we had this conversation. Here are all of the things that I've done subsequent to. And now, as he said, we can entertain the conversation around money or whatever the, other thing that you may be negotiating for. But I think the mistake that people make is waiting until the end of the year or whatever the time frame is for the performance to have that sort of self-assessment, as opposed to doing it throughout the year so that you're even much more prepared for it.
And so the employee can track their performance, track their improvement, and just monitor that and make the necessary adjustments.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
To your point, Jaquette, it's also just, no one should be shy these days about talking to your manager or your boss and saying, hey, what does the roadmap look like for performance reviews? When do you all start to think about those things? And then you back yourself out of that for 6 months, for example. And so that way you're having sort of steady conversations, steady check-ins, and it's not, the check-in isn't like, where's my money? The conversation is like, how am I tracking? Am I meeting the requirements at this level? Where would you like to see me stretch? Those types of things. What are the soft skills and the technical skills that you're building? But it's not taboo to ask what the performance review cycle looks like, what time of year people are looking at performance bonuses, what's the go, no-go date. Sometimes there's blackout periods where there's, like, you think you're talking about salary during the performance review, but they've already locked and loaded that. Like, they've already had those conversations. So don't hesitate to ask the questions to sort of get a lay of the land, a state of the state. So you're equipped and you know what you need to do.
Okay, I'm writing that down so we can come back to that point later. Thank you. That's an interesting point. For anyone who came late, the way you can ask questions of our panelists, if you hover down at the bottom, you see Q&A. You can ask an anonymous question in case you might not want your boss to know you're asking job questions. Or you can ask chat, type the question in chat at the bottom, and everyone sees it, all the panelists and all the attendees. I'm going to read a question from Jason Palmer. He says, I'm currently an associate editor at a magazine in Racine, Wisconsin. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. I'm considered in the Milwaukee market, even though we are on the border of the Chicago market as well. My 18-month review is in a month. What percentage of a raise is an acceptable amount to ask for?
That's a really good question. And to pin someone down to a number, I think it goes back to what we were saying before, just being prepared about what folks make in the market, to be, as we talked about, understanding your own worth, being able to kind of quantify what that worth is. So here's what I bring to the table. And also, too, I think, answer the question blind. I think salary history has something to do with it. If you've gotten smaller incremental raises and, you feel like you've made a compelling case that you need a really big raise this time, make it. And I think, don't be afraid to state your case. So I don't know if there is a money part of it. I will give you this perspective, though. I'm sitting in a place where we get 2 to 3%, and it comes in the raise pool essentially is 2 to 3%. What that means is that we've got payroll, which is a line item, and we increase that by 2 to 3%. Well, obviously, we just don't give everyone a 2 or 3% raise. We give merit increases based upon how you met your goals. And so it still comes down to being able to say, I did everything I needed to do and I'm deserving. And also being able to back that up with stats and data, and to think a little bit too about, what it means in order to, to keep you at the company as well. I mean, it sounds like this is someone who's been at the company who would be able to demonstrate that they're worthy. Also, too, I think it's also about the marketplace as well. So I would force that to be even a conversation about my future.
Okay, thank you.
And I would add to that as well, Tory, the idea of coming up with a range. So don't lock in just one percentage point, perhaps. Maybe it's 3 to 5 or 1 to 3, whatever it is. Don't have it just be a number, have it be a range. I also think it's important at this point to really kind of also think about what is the job that you have for money in terms of what is money's role in your life? What are you personally trying to accomplish? Because a part of that needs to be integrated into your thought process as well. And that will probably likely influence what you ask for too. Not just what the research bears in terms of the market for that role, for where you are in the industry, and again, literally the market, Midwestern market, et cetera, versus New York City is probably very different. But also, what are you trying to accomplish, and how is this going to help you to do that? That needs to be a part of the consideration as well.
You referring to as the cost of living, or maybe you want to buy a house, buy a car? Are you talking about the employees' financial needs?
Yeah, the employee, your personal financial goals need to be integrated into that equation. And it needs to not just be about survival, right? It needs to certainly include the financial obligations and responsibilities that you have. But what about beyond that? What are the savings goals that you have, the investment goals that you have, the spending goals that you have? Like, all of that comes from what you earn. And so, or at least a good portion of that comes from what you earn. And so if this job is how you are earning money, when you are negotiating, a part of that conversation, at least in your head, needs to be, well, how is this going to help me accomplish some of my own personal life and financial goals?
Gotcha. Thank you. This question is for you, Jacquette. Anonymous question. Jacquette mentioned a few key points during the beginning of the conversation, and it seemed as though it was 3 key points and one was experiencing. She mentioned that we should know the company's needs and know what we are negotiating for. And she listed experience and 2 other things. What were the 2 other points?
Yeah, that was in the moment. All right. I said that negotiation is in service to something, and that you're either, you need to know whether you're negotiating for experience, money, or both, and that you need to know what their goals are as well.
Okay. Thank
you.
Luckily
you recorded this, so they can always go back.
Right. Great recall, Jacquette. Great recall. I would have been like, oh, girl, I'm going to have to think.
Someone asked the question, G5 asked the question, does raising salary questions present job security issues? Want to take that, Leroy?
Yeah, well, no, absolutely not. We don't do this for free. So no, and no, not at all. And look, I'm married and got a bunch of kids. I need money. So I think that's understood. And nobody who you be asking that question of is doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're getting paid too. So I get a paycheck every 2 weeks, just like they do. So really, we're realistic about it. I mean, obviously, being able to raise that issue, you should. And you should think about, again, like has been said before, it's about being prepared for it, but I think it's also forcing a conversation too. Companies, managers, they invest a lot in people, but we do so because they're giving us a lot, and it's understanding that value too. Mm-hmm. And in order to keep someone, I know that's part of me keeping good people is being able to pay them. So that's really where it's coming from. I want to pay everyone. In fact, I have a lot of people, we went through the thing who I think, I'd really love to give more money to if I could. So no, please raise those issues. I mean, if it's important to you, raise it. Now, I will say this, there are other things too, after money that you should also think about as well, because I think the compensation package and also the things you think about for your own security, they go beyond money too. And I want to make sure I just say this because I don't want to forget it. If I'm coming in on the front end, I'm thinking about other things like, my social media profile. There are things now that are of value to you that probably weren't of value when I got into the business a long time ago. So I would think about those things too as well beyond money, but think about, your own personal brand and what that's going to mean years down the road. And I'll take another example too. If I were someone like a business reporter, things like that, who have specific expertise, that can translate in a lot of ways. So that's why that social media profile is important, because those people will follow you all over the country if your career takes you all over the country.
So with the social media profile, are you suggesting to put that in the contract that, if you leave, you get to take your handle with you, your followers? I know someone who at a previous job where they kept the social media handle. If you left the job, it was, I won't say the paper, let's say the Gazette, the Bill Jones, the Daily
Yeah.
Gazette, that
Mhm.
name was in the social media. When you left, the Daily Gazette stayed with him.
Right.
So
It's one of those things I would negotiate up front. They may have a specific policy, but those things, if it's a condition of someone like me who really desires someone who's out there, and if they want to make that conversation up front, I'll have it with them, and maybe we can work something out. So there's some companies that might be hard and fast with that kind of thing, but others may be flexible. So anyway, you don't know unless you ask.
okay, you bring up a good point. I wanted to talk about negotiating beyond money for whatever gym memberships or daycare or a flexible schedule, remote working. Let's talk about how you negotiate that and also the different points in your career, because you have a lot more leeway if you've been in the business 30 years and if you've been in the business 30 days. So let's talk about that. Not everybody wants. Leroy, let's talk about
Okay.
Sure.
I'll talk about, hey.
I'm happy to jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, so, well, I'll say this. There are a couple of things. If you are a veteran, I was, talking among some folks, and, I know TV people have agents and they have people who are representatives. If you are, being courted to have a job where you are in, an executive type of position where you, are in a certain bonus structure, that sort of thing, it doesn't hurt you to have an attorney look at those things. That's important, because here's what you have to think about. Not only are you thinking about the perks you need, but also you have to think about your exit too. Sometimes at that level, they want you to sign things that are non-compete, things like that. When anytime there's a legal document they want you to sign, you should have some representation. So those are some things at the upper level that you should think about. But even below that, being able to negotiate other things like training, I think that's important too. So if you're a young developing reporter and you're thinking, this is me wanting to take off in my career, how do I help myself? Well, compensation is important, but just as important probably are, being able to get the kind of training that's going to set you up to be even more valuable, because that training over the course of time, it's going to help you in terms of your salary, because the more you learn, the more accomplished you get, the more you're able to negotiate.
Okay, thank you.
Tory, I just wanted to weigh in on sort of the benefits and perks that you can start to think about negotiating. You mentioned a few of them, but the workplace flexibility and the time flexibility is something that more and more job seekers and employees are really starting to negotiate. So whether that's working from home or working from a co-working space, once or twice a week, et cetera, that's an option. Other people that I'm friends with actually have negotiated that their company send them to NABJ's conference every single, year. And like, that's just a built-in, and it doesn't take away from their vacation time or their sick leave. Like, that's another thing where you're thinking about learning and development opportunities, but do you need to do that on your own time? Or does the company allow for that, and will they support that? So that's another thing that you can negotiate. Whether it comes to sort of like outside classes, a lot of companies right now are paying for the cost for registration in various courses and classwork that aligns to your role currently. And so asking for some of those things is key. And then, for those of you who sort of work in PR or work in marketing, et cetera, thinking about sort of the things that you can ask for, whether that's payment of a career coach or an executive leadership coach, or some of these other sort of things that may be accessible to you, and that your HR department might actually know about or have sort of discounts in. I think when you're having these conversations around salary negotiation and salary questions that you're asking, it can open a ton of doors just by you being curious and you being willing to talk about more than just the dollars.
So when do you bring that up in the conversation? Because a lot of people find it very daunting, like, I'm going for a job interview, I just met these people. When do you bring that up, the negotiation, the timing of it?
Yep. Interestingly enough, most recruiters will actually ask you your salary band or your salary expectations within the first or second phone call. I and Glassdoor would absolutely say it's okay to push back on that, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into a salary band. And sometimes they ask you and you're like, I don't know. And so don't feel like you have to say it. You can push back and say, I'm not really ready to talk about salary right now. I'm still trying to figure out if this is the right fit. You can push back, because he who reveals the number first is probably lowballing. And so you kind of want to wait. You're looking to learn more about the organization, right? It's when you're job searching, it's like dating. You're trying to find the right fit and they're trying to find the right fit. And it's a job seeker's market right now. It's a hot market for you to be able to negotiate. And so I think after the second or third call or interview, you have more insight and information into what the role is going to require beyond just what the job description says. And you're getting a sense of what the company is asking for, what the newsroom is really asking for. And so then you can say, you know what, they're asking for not just writing, reporting, plus editing. They want me to be out on a red carpet and like take over my social media. Then you'll be able to have a better understanding of what is being asked of you, and you'll be able to adjust your salary requirements accordingly. Okay. So
great.
That's the advice we provide.
That's interesting. Thank you.
No problem.
I think there's also just one more thing to add to negotiating on the front end. I would think about if I'm able to freelance, that's another way to supplement your salary.
I know someone who just had that conversation with a newspaper and they told him no.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, it depends, but yes, but raise the question.
Yeah. So
if it's the ability to freelance, also too, it depends on what your education level is. I mean, there are teaching opportunities too. I'd want to know that on the front end as well, because that's another way to supplement your income too. And we have people here who teach a bunch of colleges in Atlanta, so that's another way to supplement your income too. On the front end, if I were taking a new job, I'd ask about both those things.
Okay. Thanks, Leroy. For those of you who joined us late, if you want to ask a question of the panel, if you hover down at the bottom, you see Q&A. Type your question in there. You can ask your question anonymously. Also, you can type in chat at the very bottom, and that is everyone can see the question. The panelists and all the audience members can see your name and your question. Have an anonymous question. It says, I had an interview where the recruiter indicated that the salary range is mid to high 40,000s. I explained that I would need to be on the higher end of that scale. We tentatively agreed on a 48,000, but flexible. Am I able to negotiate higher than the recruiter's range?
It does not hurt to ask and to actually present that case as to why you are asking for higher than the recruiter's range. I think that's the piece that's most important, is sort of the why and whether or not you're able to make a compelling case. Is that because, the job description doesn't quite align with the salary requirements? Is it that they're asking you to do, beyond, 40 hours of work, etc.? So it's kind of how you pushback and what you say that really makes all the difference. But yes, you can absolutely ask.
Okay.
I think that's the key, right? Don't be afraid to ask. And don't be afraid to initiate some of those conversations, even if it feels a little uncomfortable, because you won't know unless you ask. And I think sometimes when you do the initiation, it also puts you in a different light in terms of how they perceive you and how they look at you in the context of some of the other folks that they may be considering. And, I am coming at this from a different background, if you will, but I think it's a helpful example. So I think everyone knows I work as a financial behaviorist, and there are 3 arms to my business, one of which is speaking. And I went to a friend a couple of years ago who's the chief diversity officer of a financial institution, just to have her look at my proposals to give me a sense of where I was, in terms of my pricing. And she said, you're right where you should be. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting is she said, when we get proposals that are on the low end, we just throw them out. And think about that.
Because they undervalue themselves?
Huh?
Because they're undervaluing themselves, they're too cheap?
Exactly. They feel like if someone's coming in that low, they're not valuing what they're bringing to the table, and they're not really all that serious. So they just throw it out. My point being that the scenario may not be precise, but I think sometimes the thinking is parallel. So if you think that if I come in on the lower end, that'll get my foot in the door, Maybe, maybe not. But if you don't even ask to see if you can get more, you will never know. And then you'll never know whether or not you are, as Elisa was saying, pigeonholing yourself before you even have had a chance to position yourself for something bigger and greater from a money standpoint anyway.
So lowballing themselves from the get-go and hurting their, and also I assume that hurts your future growth potential because you've started so low if you do get the job. Yeah. Another question. I recently had a phone call with the news director, and she was completely upfront after reviewing my experience. Quote, this position isn't going to pay enough for what all you can do. Is this common? So she was told upfront that she was not going to, that she was being underpaid.
That she was being so the job that she was going for would have underpaid her.
Yeah, the quote, she says, quote, the person told her, the news director told her, quote, this position isn't going to pay enough for what all you can bring and do. And her question is, or his, G5, the question is this common to be told that?
I can maybe shed some light on why a little bit. So understand this, my experience with television is a little limited, but I will say this. There is an understanding that there are some jobs that are meant for people who are at an entry level because they require skills that are probably, developing skills and not advanced skills. And so you pay accordingly. And we do that in this newsroom at a newspaper. We've got jobs that are, we have pay bands that are based upon the experience and the skill you have to bring to each job. If I have a really experienced person who is interested in a job that is really the job descriptions, and I have to write job descriptions, it's meant for someone who is at a lower entry level, then we'd have that conversation up front to say that the pay is going to be befitting someone of that experience level, and you, if you're a candidate, would perhaps, there's some qualifications here that you exceed that, and the pay may be below what your standard is. And that's just an upfront conversation to have. Now, if that's someone who is willing to take that job because they need a job, then it furthers the conversation. I may not have a lot of flexibility, but I may hire someone in that instance, though.
Because they were willing to, I guess, work with you or work with the job, and you wanted them, they wanted the job, they wanted to get their foot in the door.
I did that coming to this newspaper. I've been here 9 years. I came here and took a job that some of my friends thought was below my station at the time. And here's what I negotiated. I said, okay, I will get in the door, but it was the same thing. You will have to reevaluate me. And when there's an opportunity for me to move up, we will have those conversations. I will force them. And so all I did after that was, get promoted. I went in managing no one, and now I manage 58 people.
And how long? Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
That Leroy makes is so critically important. And that goes back to what I was saying before, or at least what I was inferring before, which is you have to know what it is that you're negotiating, like what's the purpose behind the negotiation. And that means that you need to be strategic. And so sometimes you will take that opportunity that's not necessarily from a financial standpoint where you ought to be yet, if it's going to be the pathway toward you going from managing 0 to managing now 58 people in a short period of time, well, then that's great, because now that puts you in a position where the next job, you're that much more of an attractive person, not only to where you are, but also to potentially someplace else too. So it's all about the strategy behind why are you doing what you're doing.
Right, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And so part of that too, again, what people should understand, I mean, that's an unusual experience, but what it took though was being strategic and being aware. I was going from a smaller market to a bigger market. I was willing to take a job that perhaps was, again, I wasn't all that interested in, and maybe it was a little bit below my station. It was about getting in a bigger room, and once you're in a bigger room, let me see and look around and see where I can fit. And from day one, it was, okay, I'm going to start here, but I'm not going to finish here. And being upfront about those conversations with my bosses. That's why I was coming. The only reason I'm coming is to get into a bigger room and to go up. So if that's not on the table, if that's not possible, I wouldn't have come.
Gotcha. Interesting.
That's just what, and so again, I can't stress enough that the best negotiating you're ever going to do is when they want you. That's the best negotiating you ever do, is when someone wants you.
When you're high demand.
Oh, yes. Or, and I think this will answer some other questions too. When they know you can leave, if you have an offer from someone, that's the other point too. And so, you know, that's another place too, where you can talk about your future and salary and those things, because it forces a conversation. I've been in that position where I've had people come and say, I got an offer for someone. And then I have to make a case with my boss and the company to say, well, you know, we cannot lose this person. So let's think of something. And then that's when bosses get real creative, let me tell you.
And is that where the self-assessment comes in? The person's coming saying, I have an offer, I'm considering leaving.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
a high value employee, the
Yes.
team player, the person who can turn a story quickly and doesn't need 2 hours
Yes.
of editing or whatever,
Yes.
what have you.
Yes. Yes. I've had to, and I've with some success, I've gotten people more money. I've gotten people more money, and they said, you know, I really think that the other room I'm going is the room I prefer. But, you know, again, if you want to know your value, walk into your boss's office with an offer from someone else. You'll know it immediately.
Immediately. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
Amen. Yes, Leroy. Walk into your boss's office with a competing offer.
Slam the other offer down on the desk. Excuse me. Next question from an anonymous attendee. What's the best advice you've ever gotten to obtain the ultimate salary you considered a success?
The best advice I've ever received is taking my time with the negotiation. Not feeling like I had to make a move or that I need to rush the conversation, but there is a power in the pregnant pause. There is a power in saying, like, I've done this research, and I have, you know, committed to all the things that you have asked for. I feel like I am worthy of X, Y, and Z. What do you think about that? Pause. Like, don't feel the need to say, and I'm smart, and I get here on time, and I deliver the coffee. Like, don't, just pregnant pause. There's an air of confidence that comes, yes, over time, but you have to play that game of, like, put the ball in their court. Don't hesitate to say, okay, just because they've come back to you or you're in this one meeting and they don't say yes right away, that you've just lost. It's not a loss. It's a dance. It takes some time. It might take a month. It might take a couple weeks. But don't feel defeated and don't feel like it has to happen in this moment. So that's the experience that I have had, and that's where I've seen success, is by having confidence, those pregnant pauses, letting the other person say something, and then feeling like it's an ongoing conversation. It's not a one and done. Sure, you get the raise, go ahead, sis. It takes a little time, and give people that time.
That probably comes from your reporting background, just being quiet and letting the other person talk.
Well, it's very uncomfortable, right? You're like, You know what it is, the sweaty palms, you've got your notes down, like you feel like you've made a compelling case, and I don't care how old you are, it's still nerve-wracking. But there is a power in the pause.
And I would add to that, I mean, I'm not negotiating for salary, but I'm pitching for new business. And so I would add that not only that pregnant pause in a conversation, but also allowing there to be a pregnant pause in email communication. So if you don't hear back immediately, like Elisa was saying, that doesn't necessarily mean a no. It could simply mean that they need to get other people to buy in, and that's why you haven't heard back immediately. Another thing that I would add, and I just want, because I'm watching the time, and if we don't get to this, role play. And if you have a hard time practicing, you know, that pause, role play it out with a friend or with a colleague so that you can get comfortable and know how your body feels in that moment, and then be able to respond accordingly, but not accordingly in that moment with the person that you're doing the negotiation with. So if you can, buddy up with someone to role play the scenario so that you can know what it feels like, or know how you want to adjust how it feels in that moment for you in real time.
Gotcha. Thank you. Another anonymous question. Person wrote, I recently requested a raise from my boss at my performance review, most of which he's been praising my work and contributions to the team. Shortly before, I learned of the significant pay disparity between me and my colleagues. I make about $10,000 to $20,000 less. I started before them and we're all at the same job level. I expect an answer by the end of this week. If things don't end favorably, should I bring up the disparity?
Ooh. um,
That could be a tough one.
Yeah, I want to know how, if this is true, because you can bring it up, but if it's not true, then you don't really have leverage. Because the other thing too, to say that my colleagues and we all have the same job, you have to be clear about that too. Is it the same job on paper, or is it the same job because y'all sit in the same, room? I mean, that's two different things. So I'd just be a little careful about it. Now, let's assume it's all true. If it's all true, and you are in a protected class, I'm going to assume because of race, number one, and maybe gender and even some other things, this is the kind of thing that will worry someone who sits in a chair like mine. I would want to respond to this because the first thing I would do is go to HR because they are very litigation averse. And this is the kind of thing that, if an employee said, look, this is discriminatory, it could get someone in hot water if you're able to actually prove these things are true. Now, I will say the other thing too is that, you have to make sure that at your performance review that, your own house is in order. Because, if you're a underperforming employee, and you're making less than employees who are performing at a high level, then that's easy to defend. But, employees, if everything's equal, you can't defend it.
I always, with these kind of tough conversations, to the anonymous attendee who posed this question, I always come from a place of confidence, but also curiosity. Hey, boss, HR, I was curious about this. This came to my attention. I know that this company really believes in pay equity. And so I want to understand this a little bit more. Can you help me with that? As opposed to coming in very accusatory because you may not have all the information. Mm-hmm. Also, oftentimes a job or role has a pay band. And so it's not one set number that everybody who happens to be an EP gets. And so it's a band. And so that band allows for a lot of different things. And that could be a $30,000 range. It could be a $100,000 range. And so being mindful that there are things that are happening in that band. And some people negotiate really well on the front end. And so they're at the high level of the band, or because, they had a unique skill set. Really understanding what that is and is important. And so coming from a place of curiosity and also, providing a hat tip to the fact that, pay equity is important this day and age in 2020 is important. And so using those words like pay disparity or those phrases like pay equity or the gender pay gap, those are important things. But again, coming from a place of curiosity and not accusatory.
Gotcha. Thank you. It's 7:19. I'm going to stop briefly and give all the panelists, I want to give them time to introduce themselves, how they can reach you. We'll go back to the webinar, but we'll wrap up at 7:30. So how can people reach you? What's your social media, your website, your line of pajamas, your t-shirts, everything? This is the time to talk about it.
Please tell me, Leroy, you have a line of pajamas. Tell me now.
No, I look, I'm in Atlanta. I don't have anything to push other than journalism, but here's what I'm looking for. We're always looking for talented folks. And if you hadn't heard this, Atlanta's a very Black place. We do like to have Black people here. But it doesn't get blacker than a dude named Leroy from South Carolina. So there you go.
Well, how can people reach out to you, Leroy? How can people contact you, your social media? Do you want them to email you?
Yeah, you can email me, Leroy.Chapman, CHAPMAN @AJC.com. Also, Twitter. I'm starting to pay more attention to that. I am AJC Leroy Chapman. Either one. So I answer both.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Jacquet, excuse me.
That's okay. You can reach me at my website, jacquettetimmons.com. I am really active on Instagram and Twitter. So if you just put my name in the search tool, you'll get my respective handles. And to help you with that question of making sure that you are negotiating from the standpoint or integrating into the negotiation, what it is that you want money to do for you, You can do a free exercise from my website called The Financial Wheel. And it's really all about helping us to address, are we using money by design or by default? And many of us use it by default unwittingly, and I want more people to use it by design. And when you do that, that will also impact your negotiation. So it's a free exercise. It'll take you about 20 minutes. If you go to jacquettetimmons.com/wheel, you can grab it there.
Okay, thank you, Jacquette.
You're
Ms.
welcome.
Amy Elisa?
Sure. I am most active on LinkedIn. Yes, I know, Glassdoor, we're on LinkedIn. And so that's where you can reach me. Otherwise, I'm at amyelisa.jackson@glassdoor.com. And I would definitely check out all the resources that we have available on our blog, glassdoor.com/blog. We're here to educate and inform. We're here to help people everywhere find a job and company they love. And so any of the resources that are available on Glassdoor are all free. And so don't hesitate to check us out.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. We have a question, anonymous question. It says, I've always been told to focus on the positive aspects of what you bring to the table and what you've contributed to your organization. But nowadays, unions can be pretty reliable analysis about where you compare to others in terms of salary. Some unions have done studies showing a pay gap for women and minority reporters. If you know you are getting paid less than another employee with comparable experience and accomplishments, how do you raise that issue in negotiations? Do you raise it in negotiations?
We touched on this a little bit earlier. I don't think that the negotiation is really the time to raise the pay disparity conversation. I think it's about printing out, I know old school, but printing out and having a conversation with your manager about, hey, my union put this together. Here's my comp statement, not just what you take home, but your total compensation statement, and say, like, I see some disparities here and I'm trying to understand it. Can you help me? And so, and you can have that conversation with your manager or with HR. Don't feel like you have to wait until the negotiation to have this conversation. Again, pay and salary conversations are, I'm saying that plural because there's never just one. And I'm sure Leroy can attest to this as a manager, myself as a people manager. We're never just having one conversation. It's a series of conversations. And so you can ask and set time on your boss's calendar to have that conversation, dig in a little bit, get their answer, and then say, okay, I'd like to revisit this at some point. I want to do some more research. I want to revisit this. Would you be open to that? And most people will say yes.
And that's why I think, going back to what I mentioned at the top of our call with regards to doing the weekly check-ins or monthly check-ins, your conversations around compensation and salary should not just be happening right around the performance review time. Like, none of that should be a surprise. Like, from my perspective, even though I haven't worked as an employee in forever, I still feel this way because a lot of my clients are employees. That conversation should never be a surprise. It should be a validation of what you've been talking about throughout the year, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. We have a few more questions, so I'm going to go really quickly. Next one is, can you explain negotiating for experience? I may have missed it earlier. People really like that point you made, Jacquette, about negotiating for experience.
Well, I think actually Leroy shared with us a really great example of negotiating for experience, because for him, the experience was being in a different room, which would then enable him to have a different seat at a table that he wasn't sitting at his previous place of employment. So the experience could be improving a technical skill. The experience could be being in a different room where you are perhaps exposed to different levels of management or other talent. So those are some of the examples that come off the top of my head at the moment.
Okay. Leroy, do you want to jump into this again?
Well, the thing too is just be clear about what you want. And if your experience is, I want to be a manager, I want to be in upper management, I want to be an investigative reporter. You know, if the job you're negotiating right now, you want to assure that you have a path towards something you want to do, not just at this job, but what I want to do 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Be upfront about it. And here,
can I create a visual for people? I love to think in pictures. So my two favorite tools are a mind map and just a simple line where you've got one end that's your current and another end that's the future. And so if the future is, again, approaching this from a strategic standpoint, if your future is whatever the X ideal role is, how do you reverse engineer and back into where you are now? And does the position that you are contemplating or you're being offered and that you're negotiating, how does that fit into that timeline of where you are and where you want to be and the progression that you ideally see being mapped out from that line?
Okay, thank you.
Seeing it on paper, I think, is really, really helpful. And that's why I am always inviting people to either do a mind map or just do a spectrum.
Okay, thank you. This was a part 2 question. Actually, I'm going to answer the question from a senior graduating in May, Brianna Grant. I'll get that one first. We have 3 minutes left. I'm a senior graduated in May and currently looking for a job after college. I've had 8 internships at some major outlets that would equal to about 2 to 3 years of experience. How can I negotiate in a way that doesn't come off as being, quote, an entitled millennial?
Technically, aren't you Gen Z, girl? Okay. I was like, to a millennial. No. For Brianna, I think that your data is going to be your best friend, right? Coming to the table with insights and information about what those internships have provided you, what skills, both soft skills as well as technical skills that you've built up in that experience. And also how much people are being paid in that region is going to be your best friend. It's hard to overcome the entitlement bias that a lot of people have when speaking to younger job seekers. But again, when you come sort of primed and ready with those insights, it's really hard to question that. And, so it's really about doing that research, I would say.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. We only have 2 minutes left. I'm going to really quickly. This is a part 2 question. If you have a talent agent doing your contract negotiations and perhaps you believe you should be negotiated for more because your other colleague with the same job and of lesser experience is making the salary you are negotiating for, what's the best way of getting what you are worth? There's 2 questions. I'm just answer the first one, please.
Well, wouldn't the agent be the one that would be doing that negotiation? So aren't they coming to the table, like really advocating for you to have the most that they could possibly get? I don't know if the person is still on to answer that.
Can you, if that person's still on, can you answer that question? We'll come back to that. The next question, it says, this question is for Leroy. Leroy, did you have any idea of what you mentioned? Did you have any of what you mentioned to your managers in writing? Meaning after a year of doing, et cetera, quote, I will have to be reviewed for a higher position or salary and et cetera. Or was it just verbal?
Yeah, unfortunately, no. So I didn't take my own advice. I did not get this in writing at the beginning. But I did, over the course of some performance evals, I always did here's what I'm doing now. And this is what I've accomplished. And it's in service to this. So I kept the conversation going through every time I got a chance to be in front to say, here's ultimately what I want to do. Uh-huh. And so there was no mistaking it, but no, I did not get it in writing, and I probably should have.
Okay, thank you.
One of the best things I would recommend for people having conversations with their bosses or managers is after you have a one-on-one chat, after you have your performance review, salary negotiation, go back to your desk immediately to your laptop and write a note in email to your boss, manager, HR person, basically as a summary of what you all talked about, saying like, hey, I really appreciate the time. As a recap, here's what I learned from our conversation. This is what I'm taking away, and here are the next steps. Mm-hmm. Having that in email is amazing. Not only, I'm not trying to say you should use that for legal purposes, but maybe, hey, at some point you might need to. But it keeps you accountable, but also it keeps them accountable. And then there's a real baseline understanding of what you talked about and what your next steps are to follow up. So you've built a paper trail over time.
Okay, thank you. Going back to that question from before, the person responded and said, I don't think the agent is asking for as much as I should get.
Oh, well, then that's a conversation to have with the agent. Like the agent should, then he or she needs to tell the agent to ask for more. Because also remember, now you're going to give the agent, 10 to 15% of whatever you get. So you got to factor that in as well.
Okay. Last question, 731, real quick. Quote, the question is, I've been trying to make a case to my bosses about a raise and promotion before pursuing another role that I know I can get. Is there a way to make it clear without making a threat to leave? If it takes a threat to leave for your employer to perceive your value, why stay?
Well,
Go ahead.
let me say this though. If you're looking at it that's the only way to see your value, that's not it. So bosses sometimes have a series of impossible choices though, and all that does is just give you the leverage of right now. So I mean, if it is, look, if you know, if I have this actionable offer here, and if it is an actionable offer, I think that does force a conversation too, and also maybe has them rethink their priorities. But again, with a boss, there are some impossible choices, and I think a good boss wouldn't take it as threatening. I think a good boss, if they value you, will try to keep you.
Okay, great, thank you. So at 7:32, thank you everyone for being on this call. Amy Elisa Jackson, Jacquette M. Timmons, Leroy Chapman, and the staff at NABJ, Kanya Stewart and Angela Holcomb for running the webinar. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it tonight. I hope you learned something. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
This was good.
Thank you, good night.
Fantastic.
Awesome.